Hey there, welcome to Lurkbound. I'm so glad you're here. There's something about the quiet parts of the world, the places people don't usually look, that holds the most chilling secrets. Tonight, I've put together a collection of true accounts that prove sometimes the things we fear aren't just in our heads. They're out there, waiting in the silence. I'm always curious to see how far these stories travel, so definitely let me know in the comments where you're listening from tonight. And if you're a fan of these kinds of stories, feel free to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It's the best way to support what I do here. Now, make sure your doors are locked, settle in, and let's see what's lurking in the dark. When I was a kid, my brother and I sometimes got stuck babysitting the neighbor's son, Alex. None of us were thrilled about the arrangement at first, but over time it became routine. His parents and mine were close, and whenever the adults wanted a night out, Alex got dropped at our house. He was younger than us by a few years, quiet and weirdly patient for a kid. He didn't need much attention as long as he had something to focus on. That something was my Lego set. I kept it in the corner of my bedroom, right by the window. It wasn't just a bucket of random bricks. It was my pride and joy. I had cities, spaceships, little half-built experiments that I swore I'd finish one day. Alex was obsessed with it. The second he arrived, he'd go straight to my room, sit cross-legged on the carpet, and disappear into his own world. He could stay there for hours. My brother and I took full advantage of that. While Alex played quietly, we'd park ourselves in the living room and play video games, checking on him every once in a while just to make sure he was still breathing and not eating plastic. One night, everything followed the same pattern. Our parents were out to dinner with his. It was supposed to be an easy babysitting shift. Alex went to my room, Legos dumped across the floor like always. My brother and I were in the living room, lights low, the glow of the TV filling the space. At some point I stretched out on the couch and must have dozed off. I remember the muffled sounds of the game blending into sleep. Then my brother shook me awake. His face was pale in a way I hadn't seen before, not joking, not messing with me, actually scared. He said, Alex is under your bed and shaking. I was still foggy from sleep. I thought maybe Alex got hurt or scared himself watching something on TV. I rubbed my eyes and asked what was wrong with him. My brother didn't answer right away. He just told me to come look. His voice had this tight edge to it, like he didn't want to say too much in the hallway. We walked down the short stretch toward my room. The house felt different, quieter. Even the air seemed heavy. My door was half open. The lamp inside was still on, casting that warm yellow light across the carpet and the scattered Legos. I stepped in and immediately saw Alex. He was curled under my bed, pressed as far against the wall as he could get. His whole body was trembling, not small shivers, full, violent shaking like he was freezing. His eyes were huge, wet with tears, locked on something I couldn't see. I knelt down and tried to sound calm. "What's wrong? Why are you under there?" He didn't look at me at first. He just whispered, barely audible, "Him." Then he shifted his gaze toward my closet. I followed his eyes. My closet was one of those sliding door ones. It wasn't wide open, just cracked slightly, enough for a thin slice of light from the lamp to spill inside. It looked completely ordinary. Clothes hanging, shadows stacked behind them. Nothing moved. I told him it was okay. I reached down, trying to coax him out. The second I leaned closer, Alex let out this strangled sound, somewhere between a sob and a gasp. He scrambled out from under the bed with a speed I didn't think a kid his size had in him. He didn't stop to explain. He didn't stop at the doorway. He ran. We heard the front door slam. By the time my brother and I made it to the porch, Alex was already sprinting across the yard. He didn't look back once. He ran straight to his house, and sat on the front steps, arms wrapped around his knees, rocking slightly. He stayed there like that, waiting until his parents came home. When our parents returned, everyone gathered in their living room. Alex was still shaken, cheeks streaked with tears. He told the story in pieces, voice breaking. Hearing it from him made my stomach twist. He said he'd been playing with the Legos when he heard a sound from the closet. At first he thought it was just the house settling. Then he heard it again, a murmur, soft but clear enough to make out words. "Come here." He thought it was me or my brother messing with him. He turned around to say something, and that's when he noticed the closet door wasn't fully shut anymore. He swore it had been closed earlier. There was a sliver of darkness between the panels. He stared at it, waiting for one of us to jump out and laugh. Instead, he saw an eyelid open, not a full face, not a body stepping out, just an eye appearing in the crack, watching him. He said it blinked slowly, like it had all the time in the world. That's when he yelped and dove under the bed. He stayed there, listening. He said he could hear breathing, slow and close. That was when my brother came in and found him shaking. The adults didn't waste time arguing about imagination. They rushed back to our house with us trailing behind. I remember my dad pushing my bedroom door open harder than I'd ever seen him move. The room looked wrong immediately. The closet door was fully open. A knot slid aside like someone casually grabbed a shirt. It was rocked open, hanging crooked on its track. Some clothes were knocked off their hangers. A box that had been stacked neatly on the shelf was tipped over, its contents spilled. My window, which I knew had been shut because it was cold that night, was open wide. The curtain fluttered slightly in the breeze. A few things were missing, small things at first glance. A watch from my dresser, some loose cash my dad kept in a drawer. It wasn't a ransacked crime scene, but it was clear someone had been in there. Someone real. Someone who had entered through that window and hidden in my closet while a kid played on the floor a few feet away. The police were called. They dusted for prints, took notes, walked the perimeter. We never got a clean explanation. No suspect, no recovered items. Just a report and a warning to lock windows more carefully. For a long time afterward, the house didn't feel safe. I couldn't look at that closet without seeing the crack in the door and imagining an eye staring back. I replayed Alex's whisper in my head over and over. Him. Not a monster, not a ghost. A man. A stranger who had been inside my room, close enough to speak, close enough to reach out. The scariest part wasn't the missing stuff. It was the thought of timing. If Alex hadn't noticed, if he had walked closer to the closet, if he had obeyed that voice. We never babysat him in my room again. Honestly, I barely slept in there for months. My parents installed new locks, security lights, everything they could think of. Life slowly returned to normal on the surface, but something had shifted. Childhood had cracked open just enough to show what could hide inside ordinary spaces. To this day, I still think about that thin slice of light and the eye Alex swore he saw. Whether it was exactly as he described or not doesn't even matter anymore. There was someone in that closet, someone breathing quietly while a child played on the floor. And the only reason it didn't end worse is because Alex got scared and hid instead of walking closer when he was told to come here. I was home alone when this happened, still pretty young, just a teenager. It was the kind of afternoon where nothing felt unusual at first. The house was quiet, the land around it even quieter. We lived on acreage, far from neighbors, far from traffic, far from anything that felt busy or crowded. Being alone out there was normal for me, something I was used to, and usually it never bothered me. That day, I was sitting in my study, doing my own thing, not paying much attention to what was happening outside. The dogs were around the property like always, roaming, lounging, keeping watch. They were usually calm unless something truly strange was going on. That's why, when they suddenly started barking like crazy, it immediately caught my attention. This wasn't normal barking. It wasn't the bored kind or the kind they did when a bird flew too close. This was aggressive, frantic, non-stop barking, the kind that makes your stomach tighten before your brain even figures out why. I remember feeling a sudden rush of alertness, like my body knew something was wrong before I fully processed it. I stood up and walked over to the study window, expecting to see a car coming up the driveway. That was the only thing that would have made sense. Visitors were rare, but not impossible. Delivery drivers sometimes got lost. Farmers sometimes passed through nearby land. My first thought was that someone had driven in, but there was no car. Instead, I saw a man. He was walking up the drive, moving past the study window from right to left. He wasn't running, he wasn't sneaking, he was just walking, calmly, casually, like he belonged there. He was wearing blue overalls, the kind you'd expect someone working on land or machinery to wear. He looked ordinary in every way, which somehow made it more unsettling. For a second I just stood there, watching him, confused. My brain immediately tried to place him. Maybe he was a worker. Maybe he was lost. Maybe he knew my parents. But none of those explanations felt right. We lived in the middle of a 10-acre property, surrounded by barbed wire fencing. There was no easy way to just wander in. You had to know where you were going, or at least be very determined. The dogs were still barking their heads off. As he passed the study window, I felt a jolt of anxiety. I didn't recognize him. I didn't know why he was there. Instinct kicked in, and I decided to keep an eye on him. I quickly moved to the next room, which had another window facing the same side of the house. From there, I should have been able to see him continue walking along the wall, but he didn't pass that window. At first, I thought I'd just missed him. Maybe he walked faster than I expected. Maybe he turned a corner I couldn't see. I leaned closer to the glass, scanning the yard, waiting for him to come into view. Nothing. I stood there for a moment, my heart starting to beat faster. It didn't make sense. The windows were close together. There was no gap big enough for him to disappear between them without being seen. So I went back to the study window, expecting to see him further along. Still nothing. The driveway was empty. The yard was empty. The open grassland stretched out exactly the way it always had. No movement, no sound besides the dogs, who had now gone strangely quiet, like they were just as confused as I was. That's when I really started to feel uneasy. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, so I did the logical thing. I went outside. The moment I stepped out, the silence felt heavy, the kind of silence that presses in on you. I walked around the side of the house, looking for any sign of the man, footprints, movement, anything, but there was nothing. No one hiding behind the shed, no one near the fence, no sound of footsteps moving away. The property was completely open. 10 acres of grassland with no trees to hide behind, no dips in the land. Nowhere a person could vanish into without being seen. The barbed wire fence surrounded the entire property, intact and undisturbed. No gates open, no broken wire, no sign that anyone had climbed over or slipped through. And it was like he had never been there. I remember standing there, turning in a slow circle, scanning the horizon, trying to force logic into the situation. I told myself I must have imagined it. Maybe it was a trick of the light. Maybe my brain filled in a shape where there wasn't one. But the image was too clear. I knew what I saw. A man, blue overalls, walking past my window. The dogs didn't bark for no reason. I went back inside, feeling unsettled in a way I couldn't explain. The house suddenly felt bigger, emptier. Every creak made me pause. Every shadow made me glance twice. I kept replaying the moment in my head, trying to find the point where it stopped making sense. To this day, I still can't explain where he went. There were no roads nearby where someone could just walk off unseen. The main road was so quiet you could stand there for hours without a single car passing. We were surrounded by grassland, not neighbors. Anyone walking away would have been visible for a long time. That's what stuck with me the most. If he had been real, truly physical, there should have been evidence, movement, sound, something. But there was nothing. Just a brief appearance, and then empty space where a person should have been. I don't know if what I witnessed was something paranormal, or if it was one of those moments where reality seems to glitch for just a second. All I know is that it left a mark on me. It's one of those memories that resurfaces every now and then, uninvited, bringing back that same uneasy feeling. Even now, years later, I can still picture him walking past the window like it was yesterday. I've never seen him again, and no matter how much time passes, that moment remains one of the strangest and most unsettling experiences of my childhood. I still don't have an answer, and honestly, I'm not sure which possibility is more unsettling. I was 13 years old at the time, and like most teenagers, I stayed up late whenever I could. It was a cool summer night, the kind where the air feels calm and quiet, and I was lying in bed, scrolling through my phone, half awake and relaxed. My parents were asleep, the house was dark, and everything felt normal, peaceful even. Then I heard footsteps. At first, I thought I was imagining it. Houses make noise at night, and when you're tired, your brain fills in gaps. But before I could brush it off, I heard my cat hiss, not a playful sound, not irritation. It was fear. A second later came a sharp, pained cry that cut straight through the silence. I shot upright in bed. My heart started racing instantly. Adrenaline flooded my body so fast it made my hands shake. I didn't think. I reacted. I reached for the closest thing that could be used as a weapon, a pair of scissors on my desk, and wrapped my fingers around them so tightly my knuckles turned white. I cracked my bedroom door open and listened. More sounds drifted up from downstairs. Soft movement, something shifting. Then I saw light, not steady light, but the kind that bobbed up and down like someone walking with a flashlight or phone. There was also a faint metallic sound, like drawers being opened and closed. Someone was in my house. Every instinct told me to hide, to lock my door, to scream for my parents. But fear does strange things to your mind, especially when you're young. I was thinking about my cat. I was thinking about the sounds I'd heard, and I was thinking that whatever was happening, no one else knew yet. I crept out of my room and slowly made my way down the stairs, trying to stay quiet despite my racing heartbeat. Each step felt loud, even though I barely put any weight on them. My breath came shallow and uneven, and I had to fight the urge to panic. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, I peeked around the corner. There was a person standing in the kitchen. They were dressed in dark grey and black clothing and had their back to me. They were going through our drawers like they belonged there, moving casually, confidently. The sight made my stomach drop. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't someone confused or lost. They were robbing us. I had to suppress a gasp. My whole body trembled, and I had to clamp my jaw shut to keep myself from making noise. I took another step forward, then another, moving slowly, carefully, but still gripping the scissors like they were the only thing keeping me upright. That's when I saw the floor. Behind the kitchen bar, there was blood. My mind tried to reject it at first. I told myself it couldn't be what I thought it was, but I knew. Deep down, I knew. And yet I kept moving forward, forcing myself not to look too closely, not yet. I didn't want to accept what it meant. I moved closer to the intruder, my fear slowly transforming into something else, something hotter, something sharper. When I was close enough that I could hear them breathing, I acted. Everything after that happened fast, like my body was moving on its own. The intruder fell to the ground screaming, and the noise finally broke the silence of the house. But I wasn't thinking about that. I ran past them to where the blood was, my heart in my throat, my vision blurring with tears. My cat was lying on the floor. He was badly hurt. I dropped to my knees and picked him up, holding him close to my chest, begging him to stay with me. I cried into his fur, whispering to him, trying to comfort him even as I felt him growing weaker in my arms. I knew. I stayed there with him until he was gone. When I finally stood up, I felt different, numb, hollow, angry in a way I had never experienced before. My hands were shaking, my face was soaked with tears, and my chest felt like it was going to split open. Behind me, the intruder was still there. My parents came running down the stairs, awakened by the screaming. The look on their faces when they saw me is something I'll never forget. Their son, covered in blood, standing in the kitchen. A stranger on the floor. The house in chaos. Everything after that blurred together. My mom called 911. My dad grabbed me, shaking me, shouting my name, trying to understand what had just happened. I didn't fight him. I didn't say much. The adrenaline drained out of me all at once, and I collapsed onto the floor, exhausted and broken. I cried for a long time. I don't remember falling asleep, but I did. Right there on the kitchen floor, while police officers and paramedics filled the house, while lights flashed outside, while strangers spoke in calm voices about things that didn't feel real. I was taken in for questioning later. I answered everything honestly. I told them what I heard, what I saw, what I found. The investigation didn't take long. It was ruled self-defense, open and shut. That didn't make it easier. I was shaken. I was sent to therapy. I stopped sleeping normally for a long time. Loud noises made me jump. Silence made my chest tighten. And guilt, grief, and anger tangled together in ways I didn't know how to explain. 10 years later, it still haunts me. Not just the intruder, not just the violence, but the sound my cat made, the feeling of holding him, the moment when childhood ended without warning, the knowledge that one night changed everything, even though life kept moving forward like it hadn't. People reduce stories like this to a sentence or a joke or a headline, but living through it is something else entirely. Some nights still come back to me, uninvited, and I'm 13 again, standing in the dark, holding on to something sharp, realizing that the world isn't always safe, and that some moments never really let you go. And no matter how much time passes, that night remains with me. One night a few years ago, my wife and I were asleep in our bedroom. Nothing unusual about the evening. It had been a normal day. We went to bed at our usual time, lights off, house quiet, the kind of deep silence that settles in when everything outside has gone still. No storms, no wind, no traffic noise, just calm. At some point in the middle of the night, I woke up suddenly. It wasn't the kind of gentle waking where you drift up slowly. It felt like being pulled out of sleep. My eyes opened, and I immediately had this heavy, undeniable feeling that someone was in the room with us. Not a vague sense, not a dream fading away. It was the clear certainty you get when you know another person is standing close by. My body was still half asleep, heavy and slow, but my eyes adjusted quickly to the dark, and that's when I saw her. There was a woman standing at the foot of our bed. She wasn't glowing. She wasn't transparent. She looked solid, a real person. She stood there calmly, almost patiently, like she had been watching us sleep. The room was dark, but there was enough light coming in from the window that I could make out her shape clearly. Long hair, a pale outline of a face, a figure standing perfectly still. Then she slowly turned her head toward me. She didn't rush. She didn't jerk or twitch. It was a smooth, deliberate movement, like she was acknowledging that I was awake now. Her face angled toward mine, and she stared directly at me. And the strangest part is that I didn't feel terror right away. I should have. Any normal person would. But I wasn't fully awake yet, and my brain didn't process it as danger. Instead, I felt confused, curious, and my thoughts were sluggish, like they were moving through water. I remember thinking something simple and ridiculous like, why is there a woman in our bedroom? I pushed myself upright slowly. The mattress shifted under me, and I expected her to react. She didn't. She just stood there staring, no expression, no movement, just watching. The silence in the room felt thick. I could hear my own breathing. I could hear my wife breathing beside me. Everything else was frozen. I reached my hand out toward her. I didn't even fully decide to do it. My body just moved. I wanted to know if she was real. My arms stretched forward, fingers open, and I leaned slightly over the foot of the bed. Every inch felt slow, like time was dragging. When my hand reached her face, my fingers passed through empty air, and she vanished. Not faded, not stepped away. So she was simply gone. 1 second there, the next second, nothing. My hand continued forward into space where she had been standing. The shock of it finally snapped my brain fully awake. My heart slammed in my chest, and I jerked my arm back like I had touched something hot. That movement woke my wife. She rolled toward me and asked, half asleep, what I was doing. Her voice sounded normal, grounded, like a rope pulling me back into reality. I couldn't explain what I'd just seen. I didn't even understand it myself. All I could manage to say was that I thought I saw something. She mumbled something about a dream and told me to lie back down. So I did. We turned toward each other, faces close, both trying to settle again. I could feel the leftover adrenaline buzzing under my skin. My eyes stayed open longer than hers. I kept listening, waiting for some sign that the room was normal again. Then it happened. Not even a minute later, from directly behind our headboard, we heard a sound that didn't belong in any house. It was a roar, a deep, guttural, animal sound that filled the room instantly. It wasn't a quick noise. It was long and layered, like multiple animals roaring at once. It sounded like a bear mixed with a lion, mixed with something wild and unfamiliar. The vibration of it felt like it went through the wall and into the bed frame. My wife's eyes flew open at the exact same moment mine did. We both froze. The sound came from right behind our heads, not outside in the distance, not from another room. It was close. So close it felt like whatever made it was pressed against the other side of the wall. And the wall behind our headboard was an exterior second-story wall. There was nothing behind it except open air, no attic, no crawl space, no pipes big enough to carry a sound like that. Nothing. My wife screamed immediately. It wasn't a small, startled cry. It was full panic. She scrambled out of the bed and backed away from the wall like it might break open. My heart was racing so hard I could feel it in my throat. Every instinct told me to run too, but another part of me kicked in. The part that needed to understand what was happening. I grabbed the nearest thing I could use as a weapon and started searching the house. Every room, every closet, every hallway. The house was silent again. No footsteps, no open windows, no animals loose inside. I checked the doors, locked. I checked outside with the porch light, nothing moving. The night looked calm and empty, like it always did. No sign that anything had approached the house, let alone climbed up to a second-story wall and produced a roar that belonged in a jungle. When I came back to the bedroom, My wife was sitting on the floor, wrapped in a blanket, shaking. We both listened for another sound. We waited for minutes that felt like hours. Nothing came. The silence returned so completely that it almost felt fake. We didn't sleep the rest of the night. We stayed in the living room with the lights on, replaying what we heard over and over. She confirmed the direction of the sound without me asking, behind the headboard, exactly where I heard it. We even went back into the room once the sun came up and inspected the wall like we might find claw marks or cracks. There was nothing, no damage, no explanation. We tried to convince ourselves it had to be something normal. Maybe a strange animal call echoing weirdly, maybe a sound traveling through pipes, maybe a neighbor's TV at the perfect angle. But none of those explanations matched the force of it, the closeness, the way it felt inside the room with us. And layered on top of that was what I saw before it happened. I didn't want to connect the two. I still don't. But they live in the same memory now, tangled together. The woman at the foot of the bed, the roar behind our heads, 1 minute apart. We had trouble sleeping in that bedroom for a long time after that. Even with the lights off, I would catch myself staring at the foot of the bed, half expecting to see her standing there again. My wife insisted on rearranging the room so the headboard wasn't against that wall anymore. It didn't really make us feel safer, but it gave us something to do, something practical to fight the helpless feeling. Nothing like that ever happened again. No footsteps, no voices, no shadows. The house went back to being ordinary, but sometimes that almost makes it worse. If it had kept happening, maybe we could have investigated, found a pattern, discovered some hidden explanation. Instead, it was just one night. One impossible woman. One impossible sound. And a silence afterward that offered no answers at all. Even now, years later, I can describe her face perfectly in my mind. I can still hear that roar if I think about it too hard. It sits in memory like a splinter you can't pull out, small, sharp, and always there if you press the wrong spot. I still don't claim it was supernatural. I don't have a label for it. All I know is that two fully awake people heard something that should not exist behind a second-story wall, and I saw someone standing in our room who vanished when I touched her, and that's enough to keep the question open forever. It happened on a night that was supposed to be calm and relaxing, nothing out of the ordinary. I was sitting alone in my hot tub on the patio, trying to unwind. The water was warm, the jets were humming softly, and the night air was cool enough to make the steam rise around me. I remember feeling completely at ease, the kind of quiet that makes you feel safe in your own space. There was no reason to be on edge, no strange sounds, no weird feelings beforehand. From where the hot tub sat, I had a clear view through the windows into my house. The kitchen and the den were visible from the patio, softly lit from inside. Everything looked normal, familiar, still. I was half lost in my thoughts, just staring through the glass without really focusing on anything, when something inside the house caught my attention. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. There was a shape moving inside, tall and dark, passing through the kitchen area. It wasn't solid in the way a person is solid. It didn't move like someone walking normally. It glided smooth and steady, as if it wasn't affected by the floor at all. The moment I actually focused on it, my stomach dropped. It was a tall, black figure, darker than the shadows around it. The lights inside the house didn't illuminate it the way they should have. Instead of reflecting or breaking around it, the light seemed to avoid it completely, like the darkness was absorbing everything. Surrounding the figure was something that looked like black smoke or mist, slowly curling and drifting around its shape. It wasn't fast or chaotic. It moved in a slow, unsettling way, like smoke underwater. I froze. I remember sitting there in the hot tub, barely breathing, my body suddenly very aware of how exposed I was. I didn't move, didn't splash, didn't even adjust my position. I just watched. My heart started pounding so hard that I could feel it in my throat. My mind immediately tried to find a rational explanation. Maybe it was a reflection. Maybe it was steam from the hot tub mixing with the light. Maybe it was exhaustion messing with my vision. But the longer I watched, the harder it became to dismiss. The figure continued moving through the kitchen and into the den, passing in front of furniture and walls in a way that made it clear it wasn't just a shadow. It had height. It had form. It took up space. The smoky darkness around it shifted as it moved, trailing slightly behind, then slowly catching up, like it was alive in its own way. I didn't hear anything. No footsteps, no sound of movement, just the quiet bubbling of the hot tub and the distant night sounds outside. That silence made it worse. It felt wrong, like the house itself was holding its breath. What scared me most was how calm the figure seemed. It wasn't rushing, it wasn't sneaking. It moved with a steady, deliberate motion, like it belonged there, like it had done this before. There was no hesitation in the way it passed through the rooms, no reaction to anything around it. It didn't acknowledge me at all, even though I had a clear view inside. That somehow made it more disturbing than if it had noticed me. I tried to blink it away. I squeezed my eyes shut for a second, then opened them again, hoping the image would be gone. But it wasn't. The figure was still there, still moving. He's still wrapped in that strange black smoke. My skin prickled all over, the way it does when your body knows something is wrong before your mind catches up. Time felt stretched out in that moment. It probably only lasted a few seconds, maybe half a minute at most, but it felt much longer. Long enough for my fear to fully settle in. Long enough for the thought to cross my mind that I was completely alone, outside, watching something move through my home. Eventually, the figure reached the far side of the den and simply disappeared. It didn't fade out dramatically. It didn't vanish in a flash. One moment it was there, moving steadily forward, and the next moment there was nothing. Just the familiar, empty room again, unchanged and quiet. I stayed frozen for a while after that, staring through the window, waiting to see if it would reappear. My eyes scanned every corner of the kitchen and den, looking for any sign that something was still there. Nothing moved. The lights stayed the same. The house looked exactly as it always did, but I didn't feel the same. That sense of safety I had before was gone, replaced by a tight, uneasy feeling in my chest. I remember slowly getting out of the hot tub, moving carefully as if making too much noise might somehow draw attention back to me. Every shadow looked suspicious. Every reflection in the glass made my heart jump. Even once I was back inside, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had passed through my space. Something that didn't belong and didn't care whether it was seen or not. I checked the rooms, trying to reassure myself. Everything was exactly where it should be. No signs of anything unusual. No explanation waiting for me. What made it harder to forget was how clear it had been. It wasn't a vague shape. It wasn't a flicker in the corner of my eye. It was something I watched move from one room to another, fully aware of what I was seeing in the moment. The black smoke around it, the way it traveled, the way it ignored everything around it. All of it stuck with me. Even now, thinking back on it gives me chills. I still don't know what it was. I don't know if there's a logical explanation that my fear magnified, or if it was something my brain filled in under the right conditions. All I know is that I saw something that night that I can't easily explain, and the memory of it hasn't faded with time. It's the kind of experience that stays with you, not because it was loud or violent, but because it was quiet, calm, and completely out of place. And sometimes that's what makes it the most terrifying. I grew up in a 2-story house in the Philippines. It wasn't huge by mansion standards, but to a kid it felt endless. Upstairs had this massive playroom that took up almost half the floor. It was where all the noise lived: toys, old game consoles, boxes of random stuff my parents never threw away. Everything ended up there. The rest of the floor had 4 bedrooms lined along a narrow hallway that always felt darker than it should, even during the day. The stairs leading up creaked in a very specific rhythm. Everyone in the house could tell who was coming upstairs just by the sound. When I was around 11, I spent most of my afternoons in that playroom. My babysitter used to hang out with me there while my parents were at work. She was young, probably late teens, and more like an older cousin than a strict babysitter. We'd watch TV, or play cards, or just sit around talking. It was one of those slow afternoons where nothing special was happening. The air felt heavy and warm, the kind that makes you lazy. The ceiling fan was spinning, but it didn't do much except push warm air around. At some point, she told me she was going to the bathroom. The bathroom was right down the hallway from the playroom, so I could hear the door close. I stayed sitting there for maybe a minute before boredom hit me. I remember thinking about cold juice in the fridge. That thought alone was enough to get me moving. I got up and headed downstairs quietly, not really caring if she knew where I went. The stairs creaked under my weight, but I'd learned which steps to avoid to make less noise. I just opened the fridge when I heard her voice upstairs. She was calling my name. At first it sounded normal, like she was just checking where I went. I didn't answer. I figured I'd grab my drink and go back up in a second. Then she called my name again, louder this time. There was something sharp in her voice, like panic trying to hide inside a question. By the 3rd time, she was shouting. The sound echoed down the stairwell in a way that made my stomach twist. I froze with the fridge door open, cold air spilling out. I expected her to come running down the stairs after me. Instead, everything went quiet. Completely quiet. No footsteps, no doors, just silence. I assumed she realized I had gone downstairs and decided to stop yelling. I shut the fridge and leaned against the counter, waiting for her to appear. A few minutes passed. The house felt strangely still, like the air was listening. Then I heard footsteps coming down the stairs. They were slow and uneven. When she came into view, she looked wrong. Her face was pale and stiff, like she had just seen something she couldn't explain. She reached the bottom step and stared at me without blinking. It wasn't anger. It wasn't relief. It was pure confusion, mixed with fear. I laughed and asked what was wrong. She didn't laugh back. She told me she had just seen me in the playroom. She said when she came out of the bathroom, she saw me sitting on the floor near the TV, back turned to her. She thought I was ignoring her, which is why she started yelling my name. She kept calling, and the figure never turned around. It just sat there. When she walked closer, she said it felt like the air got colder. Then she blinked, and the playroom was empty. That was when she ran downstairs. I laughed because I didn't know what else to do. I told her she was imagining things. She tried to laugh too, but it sounded forced. For the rest of the afternoon, she stayed unusually close to me. She didn't leave the room again unless I came with her. I brushed it off for years. I told the story like a joke whenever it came up. I didn't believe in ghosts or doubles or anything supernatural. My brain always looked for the easy answer: stress, shadows, tricks of the eye. Then it happened again. I was 16, old enough to feel invincible, old enough to think childhood fears were stupid. My brother had the fastest internet in the house, so I was hanging out in his room using his computer. The door was open, and the hallway light spilled in. I remember hearing my little brother, he was 6 at the time, walking around upstairs calling my name. He sounded annoyed, like he wanted help with something. I didn't answer. I thought it would be funny to let him search for me. I could hear his small footsteps moving from room to room. He checked my bedroom first. I heard my door creak open, then everything went quiet. Too quiet. I assumed he got distracted by a toy or forgot why he was looking for me. Kids do that all the time. I turned back to the screen. A few seconds later, I saw him step into the hallway and look into my brother's room. He saw me, and he froze. His face changed instantly. His eyes widened so much it looked painful. He wasn't joking. He wasn't confused. He looked terrified. He whispered, "Why are there two of you?" The room felt like it tilted sideways. I stood up so fast my chair scraped against the floor. I asked him what he meant, but he just kept staring at me like I wasn't supposed to be there. He said he had just seen me standing in my bedroom. He said I was facing the wall, completely still. He tried to talk to me and I didn't respond. He thought I was mad at him. Then he walked out and saw me in a different room. I didn't laugh this time. I grabbed his hand and we both ran to my mom's room downstairs. She laughed when we told her, said we were scaring ourselves. But I remember how tight my chest felt that night. I slept in her room without arguing. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured something standing in my bedroom, wearing my shape like a mask. Years passed. I tried not to think about it. Life moved on. School, friends, work. The house just became a house again. And the last time it happened, I was 20. My parents had gone on vacation with my youngest brother, so the rest of us were supposed to stay at my grandparents' place at night. The first evening they were gone, my sister and I decided to go back home to grab more clothes. The house felt different without our parents. Bigger, emptier. Sounds echoed more. We went upstairs together. She followed me into my room because she liked borrowing my clothes. We joked around while she tossed shirts onto the bed. I told her I was going to take a shower and walked toward the bathroom. I could hear her still moving around in my room as I brushed my teeth. The bathroom mirror was foggy from the humidity. The light buzzed faintly overhead. Everything felt normal. Then the door opened. My sister stepped inside. The second she saw me, her face drained of color. It was the exact same expression I had seen years earlier on my babysitter and my brother. That same frozen disbelief. She stared at me like she was trying to understand a broken picture. I asked her what was wrong. She said she had just been talking to me in my bedroom. She said I answered her. Her voice shook when she told me this. She said I was sitting on the bed folding clothes. She asked me a question and I responded normally. Then she suddenly felt like she had to pee, so she came to the bathroom and found me standing there brushing my teeth. We stared at each other in the mirror. Neither of us laughed. We didn't argue. We didn't investigate. We didn't try to be brave. We grabbed our bags and left the house within minutes. I don't even remember locking the door. The entire drive to my grandparents' house, neither of us spoke. The silence felt safer than trying to explain what just happened. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined walking into a room and seeing myself already there, standing still, watching, waiting for me to notice. I still don't know what it was. I've tried to explain it away 100 times. Stress, imagination, coincidence stacked on coincidence. But 3 different people, years apart, all seeing the same thing. A version of me where I wasn't. I don't claim it was a ghost. I don't claim it was supernatural. I just know the fear on their faces was real. You can't fake that kind of fear. It's the kind that strips all humor out of a moment and leaves only instinct. Even now, when I think back on that house, and I don't picture the playroom or the stairs or the bedrooms, I picture someone who looked exactly like me, standing quietly in a room, pretending to belong there. And the worst part is not knowing whether it was watching us or waiting for me to come back. When I was a sophomore in high school, my parents decided to tear our house down and rebuild it. A lot of people in our neighborhood were doing the same thing to raise property value, so it didn't feel unusual. The whole process was exciting at first. I joked constantly with my parents about how cool it would be to have a hidden room like something out of a movie. I imagined a secret door behind a bookshelf or a sliding panel in the wall. It was one of those dumb, running jokes I never expected them to actually consider, but somehow they did. When the rebuild was finished and I finally saw my new room, my parents showed me what they'd done. Inside my closet, if you pushed your way past a short hanging bar and shoved the clothes aside, there was a section of wall that opened inward. Behind it was a small hidden space with a ceiling light and electrical outlets. It wasn't huge, but it was real, a secret room. My parents looked way too proud of themselves, and honestly, I was blown away. It felt like I'd been handed my own private hideout. For the first few months, I used it constantly. I brought snacks in there, played games on my phone, and hid during every game of hide and seek. No one ever found me, not once. I guarded that secret like it was treasure. Outside of my parents and the contractor, no one knew it existed, and I intended to keep it that way. It felt like something that belonged only to me, a strange little pocket of the house that the rest of the world couldn't touch. Eventually, the novelty wore off. Getting into the room was more annoying than magical. I had to wrestle past a wall of clothes, then squeeze through a narrow opening that scraped my shoulders. The hidden room itself was cramped and stuffy after a while. What had once felt special started to feel inconvenient. Without really deciding to, I just stopped going in there. A couple of months passed before anything strange happened. My family left for a 2-week vacation and asked a neighbor to check in on the house while we were gone. We'd had a string of break-ins in the area, so she stopped by every few days just to make sure everything was fine. When we got home, I was exhausted from the trip. I dragged my suitcase into my room, barely turned the lights on, and headed straight for my bed. That's when I noticed a faint glow leaking from under my closet door. At first I was annoyed. I assumed the neighbor had snooped around and left the light on. I walked over, already rehearsing the complaint I'd make to my parents. But when I reached for the switch outside the closet, I saw it was already flipped down. The light shouldn't have been on. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. I opened the closet door slowly. My clothes had been shoved to the side. The hidden wall was pushed open. The light inside the secret room was on. I just stood there staring. It didn't make sense. No one knew about that space. I tried to reason through it and landed on the neighbor as the only explanation. Maybe she'd explored the house out of curiosity. Maybe the contractor had mentioned it in passing. I didn't like the thought, but it was better than any alternative. I reached in, turned off the light, pulled the wall closed, and carefully arranged the clothes back into place. Still unsettled, I stepped backward out of the closet. From the doorway, I could see the big floor mirror in the corner of my room. I caught my reflection, pale and tired, and for a second I just watched myself breathe. Then the closet lit up behind me. I heard a scraping sound. It was soft but unmistakable, like something dragging against the floor. My heart slammed so hard it drowned everything else out. I spun around and looked inside. The clothes were shoved aside again. The hidden wall was open. The light was on. I don't remember moving. I remember being frozen, staring at it, my brain scrambling to build an explanation that wouldn't stick. Eventually, I forced myself to step forward and shut it again. I told myself I must have imagined closing it the first time. I repeated that thought until it almost sounded convincing. But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. After that night, smaller things started happening. None of them were dramatic enough to prove anything, but together they gnawed at me. I'd walk into my bathroom and find the toilet seat up every single time. I blamed my dad at first, assuming he was sneaking into my room to use it. When I asked him, He looked genuinely confused and asked why he would bother when there was another bathroom down the hall. I didn't have an answer. Some mornings I'd wake up to find my closet door wide open. That might not sound like much, but I had always been nervous about closets at night. I checked mine obsessively before bed. I'd shut it, listen for the click, and tug on it to make sure it was sealed. There was no reason it should have been open in the morning. On a few nights, I woke up to see the closet light glowing through the crack, even though I knew I hadn't turned it on. It sounds small when I say it out loud. Lights, doors, a toilet seat. But when it's happening in your own room, over and over, it gets under your skin. I reached a point where I couldn't ignore it anymore and finally told my mum while we were working together in the downstairs office. My mum doesn't believe in ghosts at all. She raised me to think ghost stories were nonsense, the kind of thing people invented because they wanted drama in their lives. That's why her reaction surprised me. When I finished explaining, she sighed and admitted she'd noticed strange things too. She told me that in our old house, she used to hear footsteps running around in my brother's room while he was at school. Every time she checked, or the room would be empty. Once she went upstairs after hearing the noise and found toys scattered across the floor that hadn't been there before. Then she told me something she had never mentioned in all the years we lived there. The previous owners had a young son who died in that room. That was why they sold the house. She said it casually, like it was just an odd piece of trivia. Then she laughed and insisted there had to be logical explanations. Old houses make noise. New houses have electrical problems. Plumbing can sound like footsteps if you listen the wrong way. She spoke with total confidence, but the fact that she'd even connected the stories shook me. We turned back to our computers and tried to move on. A minute later, a loud rushing sound filled the air. It was steady and heavy, like water running through pipes. We both looked at each other. My mom frowned and said it sounded like my shower was on. The problem was, my shower had been broken for weeks. The noise stopped as suddenly as it started. The silence that followed felt thick. Then we heard 5 heavy footsteps directly above us. My mom went pale and bolted upstairs. She flew past my dad, who was sitting on the couch watching TV, and rushed into my room. I followed, my chest tight. She tore through the space, checking the closet, looking under the bed, searching corners like she expected to find someone hiding. When she tried to explain what we heard, my dad blamed the pipes. He said new houses were full of weird sounds while everything settled. Eventually she nodded and accepted that answer out loud. I didn't. I stayed in my room after they left, sitting on the edge of my bed and staring at the closet door. A strange calm settled over me. I wasn't screaming or crying. I just felt like I'd reached an understanding with something I couldn't see. Whatever was happening didn't seem violent. It felt like I was sharing space with something I didn't fully understand but couldn't get rid of. Later, as I lay there replaying everything, I realized my new bedroom sat in the exact spot where my brother's old room had been in the previous house. I know that's not how hauntings are supposed to work. I know there are 100 rational explanations stacked against the supernatural, but when you're the one living inside the pattern, logic doesn't feel as strong as experience. I never stopped sleeping in that room. Life went on. The weird moments faded in and out, never dramatic enough to prove anything, never quiet enough to forget. And to this day, when a closet door creaks open in the middle of the night, my first thought isn't wind or bad hinges. It's that hidden room, glowing softly in the dark, waiting for me to notice. When I was younger, my mom was dating a guy I'll call JB. They had only been together a few months when he invited us to spend a weekend at his lake house. It was supposed to be a fun little trip. My mom, me, my younger brother JB, and his son, who was about my age. I remember being excited at first because I had never been to Lake Michigan, and the idea of a weekend away from home felt like an adventure. JB talked it up the whole drive, saying the place was quiet, peaceful, and right on the water. He kept saying we'd have the beach almost to ourselves because the house sat in a more isolated stretch of shoreline. To a kid, that sounded amazing. The drive took a few hours, and the further we went, the more the town seemed to thin out. Stores got smaller, gas stations were farther apart, and the roads narrowed into long stretches of trees. By the time we reached the lake house, it felt like we were at the edge of the world. The air smelled different there, cleaner and colder, and I could hear the lake before I even saw it. When we pulled into the gravel driveway, the house looked older than I expected. It wasn't huge. It was a small 2-story place, maybe 3 if you counted the massive attic tucked under the steep roof. The paint was faded and chipped in places, and the windows reflected the grey water of the lake behind it. The inside felt just as old. The first floor was one big open area that held the living room, dining space and kitchen all together. The floors creaked under every step, and the walls had that slightly yellowed look that older houses get, like they've soaked in decades of smoke and sunlight. The furniture didn't match. It looked like it had been collected piece by piece over many years. Nothing about it was openly scary, but I remember feeling uneasy almost right away. It was the kind of feeling you get when you walk into a place and it feels like you're interrupting something. JB was proud of the house and started telling us its history the minute we stepped inside. His grandfather had helped build it with his own father, board by board, decades earlier. After it was finished, the grandfather lived there most of his life and worked as a tailor in the nearby town. JB pointed at certain beams and said his family had cut the wood themselves. He talked about summers spent there as a kid, fishing off the shore and sleeping with the windows open. Everyone else seemed charmed by the story, but I couldn't shake the strange heaviness in the air. Even as a kid, I felt like the house was holding on to memories that didn't belong to us. Later that afternoon, we went up to the attic to grab beach toys JB kept stored there. The attic was huge, much bigger than I expected, stretching the full length of the house. The ceiling sloped sharply, and the only light came from a small circular window at the far end. Dust hung in the air so thick I could see it swirling when we moved. Old trunks, broken chairs, and boxes filled with forgotten junk lined the walls. It smelled like old wood and fabric, a dry, stale scent that made me want to breathe through my mouth. That's when I saw them. In the far corner of the attic, partially hidden behind a stack of boxes, stood a cluster of mannequins. There were about 8 of them. Some were just upper torsos mounted on metal stands, while others were full-bodied figures missing arms or heads. They were coated in a thin film of dust and tangled cobwebs, like they hadn't been touched in years. Even knowing JB's grandfather had been a tailor, the sight of them made my stomach tighten. Their blank faces and stiff postures felt wrong in that dim attic. It was like they were watching us. I tried to laugh it off and told myself they were just old tools from the tailor shop, nothing more. JB didn't think anything of them. He stepped around them casually to grab buckets and plastic shovels, but I kept glancing back at the mannequins while we gathered the beach gear. Something about the way they stood so close together bothered me. It felt intentional, like they had been arranged rather than stored. That night, his sleeping arrangements became a small problem. The 2 upstairs bedrooms were taken by the adults and my little brother, so JB's son and I ended up in the living room on the couch. We weren't too upset about it. We had the TV, snacks, and the big front window that looked out toward the lake. We stayed up late watching movies, whispering and laughing the way kids do when they know they should be asleep. Sometime around midnight, I woke up suddenly. The TV had gone dark, and the room was lit only by a faint blue glow from outside. For a second, I didn't know what had pulled me out of sleep. Then I heard it, a slow creak from the staircase. The sound was sharp in the silence. I froze, listening. Another creak followed, then another, spaced out like careful footsteps. I assumed it was my mum coming down to check on us. Instinctively, I nudged JB's son and whispered for him to be quiet. I reached over and clicked the TV off completely, then dove under the blanket, trying to look asleep. My heart was beating faster than it should have been. I waited for a voice, for the soft sound of someone walking across the living room. Nothing came. The house went dead silent. I counted in my head, waiting. After what felt like several minutes, curiosity pushed past my fear. I slowly lowered the blanket just enough to peek out. The kitchen was visible from the couch. At first, everything looked normal. Then my eyes adjusted to the darkness and I saw them. 3 mannequins were in the kitchen. They weren't walking, their limbs weren't moving, but they were sliding across the floor in slow, steady motions. One drifted past the table, another turned slightly, is scraping along the tile with a faint dragging sound. Their blank faces were angled toward the living room, toward me. My brain refused to accept what I was seeing. I remember thinking I must still be dreaming. I shut my eyes hard and pulled the blanket back over my head, but the sound didn't stop. The dragging grew louder, closer. A small, helpless noise escaped my throat before I could stop it. I peeked out again. One of them was only a few feet from the couch. It stood, tilted slightly forward, as if leaning in. The pale surface of its torso caught the faint light, and I could see streaks where dust had been wiped away. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Every part of me locked up. I pulled the blanket over my face again and squeezed my eyes shut so tight they hurt. I kept telling myself that if I didn't look, it couldn't see me. If I stayed still, it would go away. I don't know how long I lay there like that. Eventually, exhaustion must have dragged me back into sleep, because the next thing I remember is sunlight pouring through the window. Morning felt unreal. The living room looked completely normal. The kitchen was empty. JB's son was still asleep beside me, snoring softly. For a few seconds, I convinced myself it had been a nightmare. Just a vivid, horrible dream fueled by the creepy attic and an unfamiliar place. I clung to that explanation because the alternative was too much. I avoided talking about it. I didn't want to sound crazy. We spent the day at the beach, and I forced myself to act normal. But every time we went back inside the house, my eyes darted to the kitchen floor. I kept expecting to see scrape marks or dust trails, and I kept expecting to find one of them standing where it shouldn't be. That afternoon, we carried the beach toys back up to the attic. My chest tightened the moment I climbed the ladder. I told myself not to look at the corner. I told myself it didn't matter. But of course I looked. The mannequins were still there. Only they weren't the same. They stood in different positions, spaced out instead of clustered. The cobwebs that had covered them the day before were gone. Their surfaces looked cleaner, like they'd been handled recently. I stared at them so long, JB asked if I was okay. I mumbled something and turned away, my skin prickling with cold. I didn't say a word to anyone the rest of the trip. I didn't need confirmation. I knew what I had seen. Whether it was something supernatural or something my mind invented under stress, it felt real in a way nightmares never do. Even now, years later, the memory sits sharp and untouched in my head. You can believe it or not. I know how it sounds. But ever since that weekend, mannequins have terrified me in a way I can't explain. I can walk through haunted houses without flinching. I can watch horror movies alone at night. But put me in a quiet room with a mannequin, and I'm right back on that couch, staring into the dark, listening to something drag itself across the floor toward me. I am sorry for the interruption. I hate breaking the flow, but I am curious. Do you believe there is some truth to every story like this? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to hear more, please subscribe. Okay, let's get back to it. This happened only last year, when I was living in a really sketchy college apartment. It was one of those places you only move into because it's cheap and close to campus, not because it feels safe or comfortable. The building itself was old, the locks never felt fully secure, and the neighborhood had a reputation for being rough, especially at night. You'd hear shouting, random noises, and sometimes footsteps outside at hours when no one should be walking around. My bedroom was at the front of the apartment, and unfortunately, my window faced directly toward the front door. That meant anything happening near the entrance would cast shadows right onto my wall or across the floor. I hated that setup, but at the time I didn't really have a choice. You tell yourself you'll be fine. You always do. That night, I went to bed like normal. I don't remember having any bad feeling before falling asleep. No weird dreams, no anxiety, just another night in a place I didn't love but had gotten used to. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up suddenly. At first, I wasn't sure why. That half-awake feeling hit me, where your brain hasn't caught up yet and everything feels slow and heavy. I lay there for a second, staring toward the wall, trying to figure out what had pulled me out of sleep. That's when I noticed it. There was a shadow on my wall. Not just any shadow. It was tall, clearly shaped like a person. A man. I could see the outline of shoulders, a head, and arms. The shadow was moving slightly, and then I realized what it was doing. It looked like someone was standing outside my bedroom window, picking at it, like they were trying to pry something open or mess with the frame. Almost at the same time, I heard scratching at the front door. It wasn't loud banging. It was softer, more deliberate, like fingernails or claws dragging across the surface. Slow, repeated, way too intentional to ignore. My heart immediately started racing. That moment when fear hits you before logic has time to catch up is horrible. My entire body went cold, and I felt this wave of panic crash over me. My mind jumped straight to the worst possible conclusion. Someone was trying to break in. Someone knew people lived there. Someone was right outside my room. I reached for my phone without even thinking, my hands already shaking as I grabbed it off the nightstand. I was planning to check the time and then call for help, maybe the police, maybe one of my roommates, maybe anyone at all. The screen didn't turn on. I pressed the power button again. Nothing. That's when it hit me that my phone was completely dead. I remember feeling this sick, sinking feeling in my stomach. Of course it was dead. Of course it would happen at the worst possible moment. No flashlight, no calls, no way to text. I felt completely trapped in that room. The scratching continued at the front door. The shadow outside my window shifted slightly, and I could tell whatever was out there was still messing with it. I stayed perfectly still in bed, barely breathing, hoping that if I didn't move, maybe it wouldn't know I was awake. But panic doesn't let you stay still for long. My thoughts were spiraling. I kept thinking about how thin the window glass was, how old the door was, how far away my roommates' rooms were. I didn't even know if anyone else was home at the time. The apartment felt suddenly huge and empty. I decided I couldn't just lie there. Very slowly, I tried to sit up and slide out of bed. I was moving as carefully as I possibly could, putting my weight down inch by inch, trying not to make a sound. The moment my foot touched the floor, my bed creaked. It was a quiet noise, but in that moment it sounded deafening. Instantly, the scratching stopped. The shadow outside my window froze. I could feel my blood run cold. The shape didn't move. It didn't shift. It didn't disappear. It was just there, perfectly still, like whatever was outside had suddenly realized I was awake. and then it turned. I swear it felt like it was staring straight into my room. I couldn't see a face, obviously, just the outline of a head angled toward the window. Oh, but that was enough. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might throw up. I had never been that scared in my life. My hands were shaking uncontrollably, my legs felt weak, and my brain was screaming at me to do something, anything. I had no phone, no plan, no weapon. I was alone in my room, frozen in fear, staring at a shadow that absolutely looked like a man watching me. Something in me snapped. I don't even remember deciding to move. My body just reacted. Pure adrenaline took over. I bolted out of my room as fast as I could, not caring how loud I was anymore. At that point, staying still felt worse than making noise. I ran straight toward the front door. I didn't know what I was going to do when I got there. I didn't have a plan. I just needed to see if someone was actually there. And I rushed up to the door and leaned in to look through the peephole, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it was shaking my entire chest. And there it was, a raccoon. A stupid, chunky raccoon digging through a trash bag that my roommate had left right in front of our front door. It was tearing into it like its life depended on it, making all the scratching noises I had heard. The shape of its body, lined up with the porch light and my window, had cast the perfect shadow to look like a person standing there. The picking at my window was just it, messing with the trash, shifting around, occasionally standing up on its hind legs. I just stood there, staring, trying to process what I was seeing. The fear didn't go away immediately. My body was still shaking, my heart still racing, adrenaline still flooding my system. It took a few seconds for my brain to accept that I wasn't about to be murdered, that there wasn't a man outside my window watching me. I slid down the wall and sat on the floor, laughing and almost crying at the same time. The emotional whiplash was unreal. 1 minute I was fully convinced I was in serious danger, and the next I was staring at a raccoon committing garbage theft. Even knowing what it was, I couldn't calm down right away. My hands were still trembling and my chest felt tight. I kept replaying the moment when the shadow froze and looked at me. It still made my skin crawl, even with the explanation. Eventually I grabbed a charger, powered my phone back on, and texted my roommates about what happened. They laughed, of course, but they also felt bad. Because honestly, in that apartment and that neighborhood, my fear wasn't unreasonable. I barely slept the rest of the night. Even though I knew the truth, every little noise made me jump. Every shadow looked suspicious. That raccoon accidentally gave me one of the most intense panic attacks of my life. To this day, I still double-check my phone battery before going to sleep. And I never leave trash outside the front door anymore. Because sometimes the scariest moments come from your brain filling in the blanks before reality has a chance to catch up. I was home alone sometime around 2008. It was that in-between era where smartphones existed, but not everyone had one yet. I had a small flip phone for myself, but we still had a big wall-mounted house phone with a caller ID screen. The house was isolated too. Our nearest neighbor was about a mile away, which made nights feel extra quiet and empty. I had settled in for a long movie marathon, the kind where you don't plan to move for hours. The house phone rang suddenly, loud and sharp in the silence. I paused the movie and glanced over at the caller ID, expecting something normal. Instead, I saw my grandma's name. Not just her name, but her actual number. My stomach dropped immediately. My grandma had been dead for several years. There was no confusion about it, no recent passing, no shared phone plans. She was gone, and her number shouldn't have been calling anyone. I didn't answer. I just stared at the phone while it rang, my heart pounding harder with every second. When it finally stopped, the house felt even quieter than before. I told myself there had to be some explanation, a glitch, a wrong number, something. I tried to brush it off, turned the movie back on, and forced myself to relax. A few minutes later, my flip phone started ringing. It didn't ring once. It went crazy. I picked it up, already feeling uneasy, and looked at the screen. It was the same name, the same number, my grandma, calling my personal phone now, over and over again. As soon as one call stopped, another started. The vibration buzzed in my hand non-stop, like it wasn't going to stop until I answered. That's when things went from unsettling to terrifying. Or somewhere in the back of the house, a door slammed shut. Not gently, not from a breeze. It slammed hard enough that I felt it in my chest. Almost at the same time, I heard a man's voice. I couldn't make out exactly what he said, but I knew it was a voice. And I knew it wasn't coming from the TV. My cat shot up instantly. Her fur puffed, her body went rigid, and a low growl came out of her that I had never heard before. She wasn't looking at me. She was staring down the hallway toward the back of the house. I didn't wait to investigate. I grabbed my cat, my still ringing phone, and my car keys. I didn't even bother turning lights on. I ran straight out of the house, heart pounding, breath ragged, expecting at any second to hear footsteps behind me. I got into my car, locked the doors, and just sat there shaking. The phone kept ringing in my hand. Call after call from my grandma's name. I ignored them all and instead called my older brother, my voice breaking as I begged him to come over right now. I don't even remember exactly what I said, just that I was scared and alone and something was very wrong. He showed up not long after, still in his full prison guard gear from work. Seeing him there, armed and calm, was the first moment I felt even slightly safe. He didn't laugh it off. He didn't tell me I was overreacting. He took it seriously. Gun drawn, he went through the house room by room, checking every door, every corner, every closet. I stayed outside, watching from a distance, my cat still clutched against my chest. He didn't find anyone. No signs of a break-in, no forced doors, no open windows. Everything looked normal, and like nothing had happened at all. Eventually he told me it was clear, but the fear didn't leave. The house felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain. Weeks later, I finally got part of an answer. I found out that my oldest brother, who lived several states away at the time, had been messing with a caller ID spoofing app. He thought it would be funny to prank me by making it look like our grandma was calling. His plan was to wait until I answered and then do some stupid voice to scare me. I never answered. When I confronted him, he laughed it off and apologized, saying he had no idea it went that far or that I'd freak out like that. The phone calls finally made sense. At least that part did, but the rest didn't. He wasn't anywhere near the house. He didn't slam a door. He didn't speak inside my home, and my cat didn't growl at nothing. That part was never explained. No matter how much I replay the night in my head, there's still a gap that doesn't fit. Even now, years later, I still get chills thinking about it. The timing, the door, the voice, the way the calls kept coming while something unseen moved inside the house. Knowing that part of it was a prank almost makes it worse, because it doesn't explain the moments that scared me the most. Sometimes it's easier to accept a simple answer, but sometimes, no matter how hard you try, there's always something left over that refuses to make sense. And that night, alone in that house, I'm not convinced I was ever truly alone at all. When I was stationed in Erlangen, Germany in the early 90s, my family and I lived off post in Nuremberg. We had a small condominium on Düsseldorfer Straße. It wasn't fancy, just a normal place for a young family trying to build some stability during a military tour. My wife and I shared the apartment with our 2 daughters. Our oldest was 3 at the time, old enough to talk clearly, but still young enough to live halfway in imagination. Not long after we settled in, she started waking up in the middle of the night crying. She would run into our bedroom, shaking and upset, insisting there was a monkey in her room. That was the exact word she used every time. A monkey. The strange part was that she didn't own any toys shaped like monkeys or apes. Nothing in her books or decorations matched what she was describing. We tried to laugh it off at first, assuming it was just a nightmare or some toddler fear that would pass. But it kept happening. Night after night, she'd come running in, terrified in a way that didn't feel like ordinary bad dreams. Our bedroom and the girls' room faced each other across a short hallway. If our door was open, we had a direct line of sight into their room. One night I was sitting up in bed reading while my wife slept beside me. The apartment was quiet in that deep, heavy way it gets after midnight. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught movement to my right, toward the hallway. My first thought was that one of the girls was up again, so I put my book down and walked to their doorway. Both of them were asleep. The room was still. No toys out of place, no shadows moving. I stood there for a moment, listening to their breathing, or feeling a little foolish, and went back to bed. I picked up my book and tried to settle back into the story. A few minutes later, I saw movement again. This time I didn't get up right away. I looked directly toward their doorway from where I was sitting. What I saw is something I've replayed in my head for years. It looked like the outline of a small child walking across their bedroom. Not a shadow cast by headlights or passing cars. It had shape and motion, like a person moving with purpose. It crossed the space where my daughters were sleeping. I was out of bed instantly. I don't remember dropping the book. I don't remember my feet hitting the floor. I just remember covering the distance between the two rooms in a few desperate strides, my heart slamming in my chest. I burst into their bedroom expecting to grab someone, to confront an intruder, to find anything that made sense. There was nothing there. Both of my daughters were still asleep in their beds. The air felt normal. The room was quiet, except for the soft sounds of their breathing. I checked the closet, under the beds, the corners, anywhere a person could hide. Nothing. No open windows. No sign that anyone had entered or left. I stood there in the dark, trying to force a rational explanation onto what I'd just seen, but nothing fit. The image of that small outline walking across the room was burned into my mind. After that night, things changed for us. I didn't brush off my daughter's fear anymore. Whether it was imagination, stress, or something I couldn't name, it was real to her. And what I'd seen was real to me. For the rest of my tour, about a year and a half, we all slept in the same room. It wasn't even a discussion. I wanted my family close where I could see them. Nothing dramatic ever happened again. No voices, no objects moving, no repeat of what I saw. But the feeling lingered. Even during the day, the apartment carried a quiet tension I couldn't shake. I've spent a lot of time since then trying to reason through it. Fatigue, lighting tricks, a waking dream. Every explanation sounds acceptable until I remember how awake I was, how clear the shape looked, and how fast my body reacted before my brain had time to argue. I don't claim to know what it was. I only know that my 3-year-old was terrified of something she called a monkey, and one night I saw a small figure walk through her room when no one was there. Whatever it was, the strongest memory isn't the fear. It's the instinct that hit me in that moment. Protect your kids. Everything else fell away. Even now, decades later, that memory feels less like a ghost story and more like a snapshot of how thin the line can be between the ordinary life we think we understand and the strange things that sometimes brush up against it without explanation. "12 years ago, my brother died, and that first year after we lost him was one of the strangest periods of my life. Grief alone would have been enough to shake a family, but layered on top of the grief were things none of us could explain. They didn't feel random. They didn't feel like coincidence. Every event had this quiet, insistent feeling behind it, like someone was trying to reach across a wall we couldn't see. I'm not someone who jumps to supernatural conclusions easily. I've always been practical. But when I look back at that year, when I line up everything that happened, the only explanation that feels honest to me is that my brother was trying to contact us, not to scare us, not to haunt us, just to say he was still there in some way, still part of the family, still watching. The first thing happened only a week after his funeral. My mom was home alone that afternoon. It was around 2 o'clock, bright daylight, the kind of ordinary hour where nothing dramatic is supposed to happen. The house was quiet except for the usual daytime sounds, appliances humming, a clock ticking somewhere. Then the phone rang. She looked at the caller ID and froze. The screen showed my brother's house number. Her first thought was practical. She assumed it had to be my sister-in-law calling. Maybe something about paperwork, or the kids, or arrangements that still needed to be handled. Mom picked up right away and said hello. There was nothing. No breathing, no background noise, just silence. She said hello again, louder this time, thinking maybe the connection was bad. Still nothing. A few seconds later, the line disconnected. It left her unsettled, but she told herself there had to be a normal explanation. She waited until evening when my sister-in-law got home from work and called her back. Mom asked if she'd come home early and tried to call earlier in the day. My sister-in-law said no, she'd been at work the entire time. Then they checked the next possibility. Maybe the kids had come home from school early and used the phone. My niece and nephew swore they were in school until the final bell. The phone itself was mounted on the kitchen wall, the receiver sitting properly on the hook. There was no way it had been knocked off accidentally, no way a pet stepped on a button. The call had happened, the number had displayed clearly, but no one from that house had made it. My mom didn't say it out loud right away, but later she admitted what she felt in that moment. It didn't scare her. It comforted her. She believed it was my brother reaching out, a small signal to tell her he was still nearby. After that, the strange things didn't stop. They just changed shape. My sister-in-law is an incredible cook. Her kitchen is full of tools that most people wouldn't even recognize. Specialized knives, gadgets for very specific recipes, things she used with intention. Over the months following my brother's death, certain utensils began disappearing. Not random ones, not things the kids would play with. The missing items were always tools she used to cook his favorite meals. At first she assumed she misplaced them. Everyone does that. Kitchens get messy, drawers get reorganized. But the pattern became impossible to ignore. She'd reach for something she knew she had used recently, something she kept in a specific spot, and it would be gone. No borrowing, no lending, no explanation. I mentioned it to a friend of mine who was deeply interested in spiritual stuff. I wasn't looking for confirmation of anything. I just wanted an outside opinion. She asked me one question. Did my sister-in-law believe in ghosts? I laughed and told her absolutely not. She's one of the most grounded, no-nonsense people I know. She believes in what she can touch and measure, nothing else. My friend nodded, like that answered everything. She said sometimes when someone doesn't believe at all, it can be harder for them to notice subtle things. If someone is trying to reach them, they might escalate. Move objects, create patterns, not to frighten them, but to get their attention. The idea stayed with me. The missing utensils never turned up. Not years later. Not during moves or deep cleanings. They were simply gone. About a year after my brother died, another event layered itself onto the story in a way none of us could have predicted. My dad's partner had lost her own father the year before, and she was still drowning in grief. She decided to visit a psychic, hoping for comfort. None of us took it seriously. We assumed it would be generic reassurance, the kind of vague statements anyone could apply to their life. At first, that's exactly what it sounded like. The psychic told her the expected things. Her father was present. He loved her. He was proud. Then the tone shifted. The psychic said there was another presence in the room. A younger man. Tall, thin, dark hair, glasses. And that description matched my brother exactly, but in her emotional state, focused completely on her own father, she didn't make the connection right away. She told the psychic she didn't recognize anyone like that. The psychic asked a simple question. Who is James? James is my dad. The psychic said the younger man had a message for him, a direct message. Please tell my dad that I'm okay. When she repeated that to us later, the room went silent. The psychic had no information about our family, no names, no backstory. She had gone there only to talk about her father. Yet somehow my brother's name, his description, and a message for my dad came through. It shook all of us, even the skeptics. The most personal moments, though, were the ones that happened to me alone. 2 months after his death, I was having a brutal day emotionally. A grief hits in waves. That day felt like drowning. I went to Target early on a Sunday morning just to get out of the house. The store had barely opened. The escalators hummed softly, and the air smelled like fresh cleaning supplies. I had my hair tied up in a ponytail. As I rode the escalator up, I felt a gentle tug on it. Not painful, not aggressive. Just a familiar, playful pull, the kind you do to get someone's attention. I turned around immediately, smiling, expecting to see a co-worker who lived nearby. It would have been exactly the kind of joke she'd make. No one was there. The escalator was empty. The store floor below me was open and quiet. There was nowhere someone could have ducked in that split second. The feeling of the tug still lingered on my scalp. My smile faded, replaced by a strange calm. Instead of fear, I felt acknowledged, like someone had tapped my shoulder to say, I know today is hard. 9 months after he died came the moment I still feel in my body when I remember it. I was asleep in bed around 3 in the morning. Deep sleep, the kind where dreams are heavy. Suddenly I felt the mattress dip at the edge, the unmistakable weight of someone sitting down. It wasn't subtle. The bed moved. My first thought was pure survival. Someone had broken into my room. I lay frozen on my stomach, heart racing. Before I could turn, I felt the person lean toward me. Gentle, careful, an arm across my back, a cheek resting against my hair. It was the softest hug imaginable, protective, familiar. I couldn't see anything. I couldn't hear breathing. But I felt every point of contact. The pressure of the mattress, the warmth, the weight. For a split second, the fear vanished and was replaced by a rush of recognition so strong it hurt. Then instinct took over. I bolted upright, screaming, and slammed the light on. The room was empty, but my hair was still warm where that cheek had rested. My back still remembered the shape of the embrace. I sat there shaking, not from terror, but from the overwhelming certainty that whoever had touched me meant comfort, not harm. That was the last time anything physical happened. 12 years have passed since then. Life moved forward the way it always does. The strange events faded. The house stayed quiet. Phones behaved normally. Objects stayed where we left them. But the memory of that first year never faded with them. I still can't explain any of it in a way that satisfies logic. Maybe there are scientific answers waiting to be discovered. Maybe grief opens doors in the mind we don't understand. Or maybe love doesn't end as cleanly as we think it does. All I know is that during the worst year of our lives, when our family felt broken and incomplete, something kept reaching back toward us. Small gestures, signals, comfort. not to drag us into fear, but to pull us toward peace. And whether it was my brother or something else wearing his shape, the message always felt the same. I'm still here, I'm okay, and I haven't left you. I've always been a skeptical person. I'm the kind of guy who needs a logical explanation for everything. Ghosts, paranormal stories, glitches in reality. I usually assume there's a misunderstanding somewhere. But something happened a few years ago that still sits in the back of my mind, and no matter how much I try to reason through it, I can't land on an explanation that feels complete. It wasn't dramatic. No shadows, no voices, no figures in the dark. That's probably why it unsettles me more. It was small, quiet, ordinary, and completely wrong. It happened after a long flight. My father had come to pick me up from the airport late in the evening. I remember feeling exhausted in that heavy, foggy way that only airport travel can cause. Airports have this strange effect on time. Hours feel compressed and stretched at the same time. When you walk under bright artificial lights, surrounded by strangers, announcements echoing overhead, and your brain never really gets to rest. By the time I got into the car, I just wanted to be home. We loaded my luggage into the trunk, and I slid into the passenger seat. The car smelled familiar, like coffee and the faint scent of the air freshener my dad always used. He asked about my trip and we started driving. It felt good to be back in something normal after the chaos of travel. I leaned my head against the window and tried to relax. That's when I suddenly remembered my small bag. My stomach dropped. I had left it in the airport restroom. It wasn't a big suitcase, just a small personal bag with a few things I didn't want to lose. Passport copies, some chargers, random travel stuff. The realization hit me like a jolt of electricity. I told my father immediately, and without hesitation, he turned the car around. He didn't even get mad. He just sighed in that tired way parents do and said, "Let's go get it." We drove back to the airport parking structure. It was one of those multi-level garages with concrete walls and echoing footsteps, the kind that always feels slightly cold no matter the season. The entrance was guarded. There was a booth with a parking attendant and a barrier arm that lifted only after we took a ticket. My dad parked on one of the upper levels. We locked the car. I remember the click clearly. Even if we hadn't locked it manually, the car locks itself after about 30 seconds. It's one of those modern features you don't think about until moments like this. We hurried back into the airport. The whole time I was mentally preparing for the bag to be gone. Airports are full of people. I imagined the worst-case scenario. But when I reached the restroom, the bag was still there, sitting exactly where I left it. Relief washed over me so hard, I almost laughed. I grabbed it, and we walked back to the parking garage, both of us quieter now, tired but relieved. The garage was still calm and empty. The air smelled faintly of oil and dust. Our footsteps echoed as we walked to the car. Nothing felt unusual. No one was around. The parking attendant was still in his booth downstairs. It had been maybe 4 minutes total since we left the vehicle. My father unlocked the car. He opened the driver's door and froze. At first I didn't understand why he stopped moving. Then I leaned forward and saw it. Sitting perfectly centered on the driver's seat was a small basket of raspberries. Not spilled, not crushed, not half open. A neat, tiny basket, like the kind you'd buy at a grocery store. Fresh, red raspberries. They looked almost bright against the dark seat fabric, like someone had placed them there deliberately. For a moment my brain refused to process what I was seeing. It felt like walking into the wrong scene in a movie. My father turned and looked at me slowly. I looked back at him. Neither of us spoke for a few seconds. It was the silence that made it worse. If one of us had laughed or made a joke, the tension might have broken, but we both knew the same thing at the same time. Those raspberries were not there before. He had been sitting in that seat minutes earlier. I had been in the passenger seat. We had both been in the car. There was no basket. There was no fruit. Nothing even close to it. And yet there it was, as real as anything else in the world. My first reaction was to scan the car. I checked the floor, the back seats, the trunk latch. Everything was exactly as we left it. No broken glass, no sign of forced entry. The doors had been locked. The windows were closed. The car looked untouched except for that impossible object sitting in plain view. We looked around the garage. Still empty. My father picked up the basket carefully, like it might explode. The raspberries were cold, fresh, and slightly damp, like they had just come out of a refrigerator. They didn't look old. They didn't look like something that had been sitting in a hot car. They looked newly purchased. We went back down to the parking attendant and asked if anyone had approached our vehicle while we were gone. He shook his head immediately. He said no one had entered or exited the level during those few minutes. He seemed confused by the question. From his perspective, nothing unusual had happened. We walked back to the car in silence. I remember my heart beating faster than it should have. It wasn't fear exactly. It was the sensation of reality slipping slightly out of alignment. The world still looked normal. The garage was still a garage. The car was still our car. But something had inserted itself into the timeline in a way that didn't make sense. We sat there staring at the raspberries for a long time. We tried to invent explanations. Maybe they had been there earlier and we missed them. But how? They were sitting on the driver's seat. My father had been sitting there. There is no version of events where a man sits on a basket of raspberries and doesn't notice. Maybe someone had access to the car earlier that day. But why raspberries? Why not steal something? Why leave fruit? Maybe we were tired and confused. Travel exhaustion can do strange things to the brain. But both of us remembered the same sequence clearly. Both of us were certain the seat had been empty. Shared confusion didn't make it less strange. In the end, we drove home with the basket sitting in the cup holder between us. Neither of us touched them. They felt like evidence of something we didn't understand. When we got home, we left them on the kitchen counter and just stared at them again under the bright light. They looked so ordinary. That's what made it unbearable. There was nothing supernatural about their appearance. They were just raspberries. My family still talks about that night. It has become one of those stories that gets retold at gatherings, half joking and half serious. Everyone tries to solve it. Someone always suggests a logical explanation. Someone else points out why that explanation doesn't quite fit. The conversation loops in circles and ends where it started. I still consider myself a skeptic. I don't think it was magic. I don't think it was a ghost. But I also can't place it neatly into a box labeled misunderstanding. The memory is too sharp. The details are too specific. Two people witnessed the same impossibility at the same time. What unsettles me most isn't the raspberries themselves. It's the realization that there are moments when reality feels less solid than we assume. We move through life believing we understand the rules. Locked doors stay locked. Objects don't appear from nowhere. Cause leads to effect in a straight line. And then something tiny happens that doesn't follow the script. No shadow figure, no dramatic event, just a small basket of fruit sitting where it should not exist. And that quiet contradiction has stayed with me longer than any ghost story ever could. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, in the foothills of the Cascade Mountains, close enough to Mount St. Helens that it always felt like a quiet giant watching over everything. That part of Washington has a strange atmosphere, even on ordinary days. The forests are thick, the air is heavy with pine and damp earth, and the mountains seem old in a way that presses on you if you stand still long enough. It's a place filled with stories. Some of them come from native traditions passed down for generations. Others come from loggers, trappers, miners, and hunters who spent their lives deep in the woods. When you grow up surrounded by people who treat those stories like lived experience instead of entertainment, it changes how you see the land. One of my father's closest friends was a native man we all called Charlie. He was already elderly when I was a child, and he carried himself with the calm certainty of someone who had seen the world change around him more than once. He had lived in that region long before most of the towns were built up the way I knew them. To us kids, he felt like a living connection to a past we could barely imagine. Charlie would sit with us for hours and tell stories. Adults listened just as closely as the children did. Some stories were tribal legends that had been told for generations. Others were personal experiences he swore happened in the woods. A few were things he said were told to him by other members of his tribe or by old trappers and prospectors from the 1800s. When I was little, I assumed it was all just storytelling in the way adults entertain kids. As I grew older, I realized Charlie wasn't joking. He believed every word he said. He spoke about the mountains the way you'd talk about a neighbor you'd known your whole life, and the unsettling part was that, over time, I began to see things myself that lined up a little too well with what he described. The easiest thing to talk about were the ridge lights, sometimes called mountain lights by locals. Charlie had several names for them in his own language. According to him, they'd been around as long as people had walked those mountains. On clear nights, they would appear high along the ridges, moving in ways that didn't make sense. They didn't drift like lanterns or flicker like distant headlights. They darted. They shot across the sky, stopped suddenly, then changed direction at angles that should have been impossible. The first time I saw them, I was still a kid. I remember standing outside our farmhouse, the night air cold enough to sting my nose, staring up as these lights zipped silently over the mountains. There was no engine noise, no blinking pattern like an airplane, just pure motion. I saw them several times after that as I grew up. Each sighting felt the same, a strange mix of awe and confusion. If I had to describe them now, I'd say they looked exactly like what people imagine when they talk about UFOs. Craft or lights that moved in ways our aircraft couldn't replicate. For a while, the Western Cascades were known as a hotspot for sightings. Then, sometime in the mid-90s, the reports seemed to fade. The last time I saw the ridge lights was around then. It was as if whatever had been visiting simply stopped. The lights weren't the only experience that stuck with me. When I was very young, I woke up in the middle of the night to flashing brightness pouring through my bedroom window. The walls were lit with shifting colors, red, blue, white, and a vivid green that didn't match any emergency lights I'd ever seen. I wasn't scared. That's the part that always bothered me later. I felt calm, almost curious. I got out of bed and walked through the house. Every window showed the same flashing glow outside. I went into my parents' room and tried to wake them. They didn't stir. My father was a Vietnam veteran who normally woke up at the slightest sound. Yet that night, he slept like he was drugged. After a minute, I gave up, shrugged in the simple way children do, and went back to bed. In the morning, I told them what I'd seen. They insisted it was a dream. I believed them, mostly because of how impossible the alternative sounded. Years later, when I was a teenager, I was talking with the granddaughter of our old neighbor. The neighbor himself had been a notorious drunk and known for wild stories. She was laughing about the tales he used to tell when she mentioned one in particular. He had sworn that aliens landed in his field one night and that a craft sat there flashing red, green, blue, and white lights. I laughed and said I would have noticed something like that because our yard connected to his field. She replied that he always said the entire area was lit up, and that any nearby houses would have seen the same lights. The way she described it matched my memory perfectly. The same colors, the same flashing intensity. I didn't suddenly decide I'd witnessed a spaceship landing. I'm careful about jumping to conclusions. But the overlap unsettled me. But two separate memories, years apart, describing the same impossible light show in the same place. It left a quiet question in my mind that never really went away. Then there's the legend that overshadows everything else in those mountains. Sasquatch. Bigfoot. Growing up there, belief in Sasquatch wasn't treated as fringe or laughable. It was spoken about the way you'd talk about a rare animal that most people never see, but some people swear exists. I consider myself a rational person. I value science and evidence. But I also saw something as a child that I've never been able to explain away. My father owned a piece of undeveloped land with a creek running through a shallow ravine. One day, we were out there with a hunter friend, surveying the property. Though near the edge of the creek bed, we found a set of footprints pressed deep into the soft earth. They were enormous. My father immediately said they looked like Bigfoot tracks. The hunter laughed and said a man could have made them. To prove it, he climbed onto a fallen log, pulled off his boots, and jumped down barefoot next to the print. This man was huge, around 6'6", and built like a linebacker. His landing left a shallow indentation, maybe half an inch deep. The mysterious footprint beside it was far larger and sank at least 1.5 inches into the ground. It was longer than the hunter's foot by a full hand length. The strangest part was the toe. The big toe angled outward, almost like a thumb, nothing like a normal human foot. My father made a plaster cast of the print and still kept it years later. He showed it to Charlie, who studied it quietly. Charlie's advice was simple. Leave Sasquatch alone, and he'll leave you alone. He told us that when Sasquatch was near, the forest would go silent. Birds would stop. Small animals would vanish. Sometimes, he said, you could smell him. If you ever caught that smell, it meant he was much closer than you wanted him to be, and it was time to leave. As the years passed, we paid attention to the woods in a new way. Whenever the forest fell unnaturally quiet, we turned back. Twice in my life I caught that smell. It was thick and heavy, like wet fur mixed with old sweat and mold. The second time I was a teenager hiking with my girlfriend. The moment the odor hit me, a memory of Charlie's warning came rushing back. He had once said never to enter Sasquatch territory with a woman on her period, because the creature could smell blood and might follow her, driven by instincts no one fully understood. It was an awkward, panicked moment. I asked her the question in a rush, my voice shaking. She was embarrassed but answered honestly. The timing matched. I told her we had to leave immediately. I didn't try to explain everything in detail. Something primal in me was already screaming to get out. As we hiked back toward the trail, we both heard it. Sticks snapping, branches shifting behind us. Not close enough to see anything, but close enough to feel pursued. There's a specific kind of fear that settles into your stomach when you know you're being watched. It's older than language. Every step felt heavy, like the woods themselves were holding their breath. We didn't run. Running felt like an invitation to be chased. We just walked as fast as we could without losing control, listening to the sounds trail us all the way to the edge of the trees. The moment we stepped into the open air near the road, the noise stopped. We never saw anything, no towering silhouette, no final confirmation. But we stood there shaking, both certain we hadn't imagined it. Even now, years later, I can still recall that smell and the silence that came with it. I don't claim to have all the answers. I don't insist every legend is literal truth. But I grew up in a place where the line between myth and memory is thin. I've seen lights that moved like nothing built by human hands. I've woken to colors that had no clear source. I've stood over footprints too large to belong to any person I know. Living there taught me a kind of respect. The mountains don't care what you believe. They hold their secrets whether you accept them or not. And sometimes, when the forest goes quiet and the air feels heavy, I still think of Charlie's voice telling us to listen carefully, to trust our instincts, and to remember that not everything in the world needs our understanding to be real. When I was 17, I moved into my first apartment after graduating high school. It was a small, cozy place, perfect for living alone, and I shared it only with my cat, Snowball. I had named her when I was 8, and the name had stuck, even though it sounded ridiculous to most people. Snowball was my only companion at that point, and she was very much a part of my life. I had never been a fan of dealing with cat litter. Cleaning out a litter box every day was tedious and unpleasant, and the little shovels never made it any easier. To make things simpler, I bought a motion-activated, self-cleaning litter box. I left it on the back patio and ran the power cord inside to plug it in, leaving the sliding door open just enough for Snowball to come and go freely, maybe 5 or 6 inches. The patio was small, only about 8 feet by 8 feet, with a cement floor and surrounded by a 5-foot wooden fence. From the layout of my apartment, if you looked out from my bedroom, you could see the sliding door with its hanging blinds, the living room in between, and the kitchen off to the right. One night, around midnight or 1 in the morning, I was playing Counter-Strike on my computer, completely focused and deeply absorbed in the game. I was in the zone, my attention locked on the screen, when I heard Snowball making a strange, guttural growling noise, one of those deep, roar sounds cats make when something frightens or irritates them. I didn't think much of it at first, too engrossed in the game to notice what she was reacting to, so I told her to knock it off without even looking up from the screen. The sound continued, and it got louder and more urgent. Finally, I realized something was off. I got up and saw her standing rigidly in the doorway, back arched, fur standing on end in full Halloween cat mode. Her eyes were wide, locked on something in the living room. I froze for a moment, trying to figure out what she was reacting to, but there was nothing there. I looked down at her and then back up toward the living room, and that's when it happened. Something small and fast ran across the kitchen. It was only about 1 foot or 1.5 feet tall humanoid, moving with an unnatural speed. It wore what looked like a tattered cloak or bag, and it moved in a way that made my stomach drop. Time seemed to slow, and I watched everything happen in sharp, terrifying detail. Snowball leapt backward, and I jumped in response. The thing ran out the sliding door and disappeared into the backyard. I stared at the blinds, swinging in the open doorway, trying to process what had just happened, and I noticed something even stranger. At the very bottom, between the blinds, I saw a small, shadowy face staring at me with glowing yellow eyes and a distorted, almost animal-like appearance. My heart stopped for a moment as a singular loud thought ran through my mind. You aren't supposed to see this. The blinds immediately shot outward and upward, rattling loudly against the wall, making an ungodly racket. I could hardly breathe. My body shook uncontrollably as I tried to comprehend what I had just seen. I grabbed the biggest knife I could find from the kitchen drawer, trembling with adrenaline, and crouched near the sliding door, unsure if I should move or stay frozen. The creature had disappeared, but the feeling of being watched lingered, heavy and suffocating. I tried to calm myself down, reasoning that it must have been a raccoon, a cat, or some animal trapped in a bag, but none of it fit. The movement was too precise, too fast, too calculated to be any normal creature. I unplugged the cord to the litter box, fearing it might have been the cause of some electrical disturbance, and threw it outside, only for it to hit the wall and fall back inside. I tried again, finally getting it to land in the yard. Then I heard scratching sounds from the fence. I looked up and saw two tiny hands, clawed and misshapen, gripping the top of the fence. The creature had climbed down, hanging by its feet, and landed silently in the bushes, disappearing into the darkness. I slammed the door shut and locked it, my heart pounding like it would explode. The cat refused to approach the door after that, staying close to me, tense and alert, as if she too understood that what we had seen was dangerous and incomprehensible. After that night, I spent days researching everything I could find about small supernatural creatures, folklore, and Irish fairies, even though I lived on the west coast of the United States, far from Ireland. I read about all kinds of creatures, fairies and spirits, but nothing fully explained what I had seen. It didn't matter how much I tried to rationalize it. I had witnessed something that defied explanation, something that left an impression on my mind and changed how I viewed the world. The experience shook me to my core, leaving a lingering fear that has followed me for years. I became hyper-aware of my surroundings, or more cautious and more skeptical of the world, yet also more curious about the unexplained. Even now, over a decade later, the memory is vivid, etched into my mind in a way few other experiences have ever been. I sometimes wonder if I was hallucinating, if stress and adrenaline created a temporary illusion, but deep down, I know what I saw felt real. Snowball's behavior, the precise movements, and the intense feeling of being watched all suggested that something truly unnatural had occurred. The night left me questioning the boundaries between the natural and the supernatural, the known and the unknown, and it has stayed with me, shaping my thoughts about fear, belief, and the limits of human perception. The aftermath of that night affected my life profoundly. I became more cautious in general, avoiding unnecessary risks, especially in situations where I felt vulnerable. I also became fascinated with folklore and the supernatural, reading extensively about creatures, spirits, and myths from various cultures. While I remained skeptical, the experience instilled a deep respect for the unknown and a recognition that not everything could be explained by logic alone. I learned that fear could teach you, sharpen your senses, and make you aware of things you might otherwise ignore. Snowball became my protector in a strange, instinctive way, her reactions alerting me to things my eyes could not always see. The bond between us strengthened, and her presence reassured me that not all of the world's mysteries were malevolent, though some were undeniably frightening. Even now, when I think back to that night, I feel a mix of disbelief, awe, and lingering fear. I often wonder if I will ever encounter anything like it again, or if it was a once-in-a-lifetime event that pushed the limits of my perception. The experience reminded me of how fragile our understanding of reality can be, and how much of what we perceive is filtered through our fears, our expectations, and our instincts. It left me with a lifelong awareness that the world is far stranger and more mysterious than I had ever imagined, and that sometimes the most terrifying encounters are those that challenge everything we think we know. The story ends here. If this one stayed with you, please leave a comment. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe so you are here for the next one. Until then, stay safe.